She had a name once. A crown. A throne. A husband who swore before God to love her. Then came the night the torches went dark. The night the guards did not bow. The night the doors did not open. She pressed her hands against the cold stone wall. She called out. No one answered. Because real kings do not answer to women. Not even their own. This is not legend. This is not myth. This happened. In real castles. To real women. Women with names. With children. With prayers still warm on their lips. And the world outside those walls never knew. Stay. Because what you are about to hear was never meant to be spoken aloud. The year is 1308. Europe is a world of stone and shadow. Castles rise like broken teeth from the earth, grey, immovable, absolute. Inside them, kings hold court. They feast. They legislate. They wage war. And behind the great halls, behind the tapestries and the gilded doors, they keep secrets. The most dangerous secrets in history were not locked in vaults. They were locked in women. Women who knew too much. Women who dared to speak. Women who once held power and reminded powerful men of what they had lost. A queen was not merely a wife. She was a political instrument. A treaty signed in flesh. Her womb was property of the crown. Her words monitored. Her alliances suspected. Her tears irrelevant. And when she ceased to be useful, when she grew too bold, too beloved, too knowing, the castle did not protect her. The castle became her cage. Her name was Isabella. Not the famous one. Not the one history chose to remember. This Isabella was younger. Softer in the eyes. Born into a world that told her beauty was power. They lied. She married at 14. As was custom. As was expected. Her husband was twice her age, cold as the river in January, and already bored of her before the wedding feast had ended. But Isabella was clever. She watched. She listened at doors. She memorized faces. She read letters that were not meant for her eyes. And slowly, quietly, she began to understand the machinery of the court. Who owed whom? Who feared whom? Who was sleeping in beds they should not be sleeping in? She said nothing. For years she said nothing. Because she understood something the other women did not. Knowledge, in the hands of a queen, was a blade. And a blade must be hidden until the moment is right. That moment came on a cold October evening. She made her move. And the king found out. He did not rage. He did not shout. He simply looked at her across the great dining table. And smiled. That smile. That was when Isabella knew. She had miscalculated. The next morning, her ladies-in-waiting were gone. Her correspondence seized. Her personal guards replaced. And when she walked to her chamber window and looked down into the courtyard below, she saw them loading a cart. Her belongings. Every gown. Every book. Every letter she had ever written or received. She turned to ask the new guard what this meant. He did not look at her. He stared straight ahead. As if she were already nothing. As if she were already gone. This is what kings understood that women often did not. Power is not taken in a single blow. It is dismantled. Quietly. Methodically. First they remove your people. The ones who love you. The ones who would carry messages, whisper warnings, fight for you in dark corridors. Gone. Then they remove your voice. No letters out. No visitors in. No priest who answers to anyone but the crown. Then they remove your identity. No longer queen. No longer wife. A ward of the state. A problem to be managed. And finally they remove your location. She was moved in the night. No ceremony. No farewell. A covered wagon. 2 guards. 1 torch. She did not know where they were taking her. She would not know for weeks. The castle they brought her to had no name. Not one that anyone spoke aloud. It sat in a valley where the fog never fully lifted. Its walls were black with moisture. Its corridors smelled of old fire and older grief. And as she stepped inside, she understood. This was not a palace. This was not even a prison, in the way one thinks of prisons. This was a place where women were sent to be forgotten. And it was full. She was not the first. She would not be the last. In the cell beside hers, there was a woman who no longer spoke. She had been there 11 years. She had arrived as a countess. She had arrived with fire in her eyes and a lawsuit against the king's treasurer, a lawsuit that, if heard, would have exposed corruption reaching all the way to the throne. The lawsuit was never heard. She was never heard. In the cell above, there was a woman who had once been a royal physician's wife. Her crime? She had kept records. Medical records of what happened to certain women who entered the castle and were never seen again. She had tried to show those records to a bishop. The bishop had told the king. And the woman with the records had disappeared within a fortnight. In the deepest cell, the one where no torchlight reached, there was a woman whose name no one knew. She had been there so long that the guards had forgotten why she was there. They brought her food because that was their instruction. No one had ever given the instruction to stop. Isabella sat in her cell and listened to these women in the dark. And she wept. Not for herself. For them. For what the world outside would never know. 3 months into her imprisonment, a guard slipped something under her door. A piece of parchment. Folded once. She waited until he was gone. She unfolded it. 3 words. 3 words written in a handwriting she recognized. A handwriting she had not seen in years. The handwriting of a man who was supposed to be dead. She pressed the parchment to her chest. Her hands were shaking. Because if he was alive, if he had found her, then there was still a chance. But there was also this. If the king had sent this letter himself as bait, as test, as trap, then whoever came to rescue her would die. And she would be moved somewhere even the fog could not find. Let us speak now of the king. Because history has been kind to kings. History was written by men who served them. He was not a monster in the way we imagine monsters. He did not cackle. He did not gloat. He was calm. He was rational in the way that men who have never been told no are rational. In his mind, he had done nothing wrong. She had moved against him. He had neutralized the threat. That was statecraft. That was simply the natural order. Women were not meant to hold maps. Were not meant to understand troop movements and debt records and the whispered conversations of ambassadors. That knowledge did not belong to them. And so he had taken it back. He had taken her back. Back to silence. Back to smallness. Back to the only thing a woman was in his theology of power. An object. Owned. Stored. Forgotten when inconvenient. He never visited her. Not once. But he kept meticulous records of her captivity. He knew the dimensions of her cell. He approved her rations. He reviewed the quarterly reports of her condition. Control. That was the word. Not hatred. Control. Because to him, even in that forgotten valley, even behind those black walls, she still had to be managed. She still frightened him. Even imprisoned. Even starving. Even forgotten. She frightened him. And that, more than anything, tells you everything you need to know about power. They tried to break her. Of course they did. It is what power does when it cannot simply kill. They reduced her rations. They took her candle. For 30 days she lived in complete darkness. She counted time by her hunger. She prayed by memory every word of every prayer she had ever learned, recited in the black silence of her cell. She did not break. She grew quiet, yes. She grew thin. She grew old faster than any woman should. But something deeper, some core of her, something that the king could not name and therefore could not target. It held. In the cell beside her, the countess, who no longer spoke, began to hum. Softly at first. Then louder. A hymn. Ancient. Half-remembered. And Isabella, in the darkness, recognized it. She joined her voice to it. And then the woman above, the physician's wife. And then others. Down the corridor. Cell by cell. Women who had been silent for years. Women who had forgotten they had voices. They sang. In the dark. In the cold. In the forgotten castle in the valley of fog. They sang. The guard stood in the corridor and did not know what to do. Nothing in their orders covered this. Nothing in the king's meticulous records had anticipated this. That women, stripped of everything, still had this. Still had each other. Still had sound. It was not a rescue. It was something more complicated than a rescue. A delegation had arrived. From Rome. A papal envoy. 3 priests. A letter bearing the seal of the Pope himself. Someone had talked. Someone we do not know who, history did not record their name, had managed to get a message out. Had managed to tell the church what was happening in that valley. And the church, for all its own sins, for all its own crimes against women across the centuries, had decided, this once, to act. The king's men met the envoy at the gate. There were heated words. The king's castellan said the castle held no prisoners of significance. The papal envoy said he would like to see for himself. The castellan said that would not be possible. The envoy reached into his robes. Produced a second letter. This one bore a different seal. The seal of 3 allied kingdoms, co-signed. The castellan read it. His face went the color of ash. He stepped aside. The envoy walked through the darkness of that corridor. Torch held high. Counting doors. And then he stopped. Outside one cell in particular. He had been given a name. One name. He spoke it aloud into the silence. Waited. A voice came back. Thin. Worn. But unmistakable. Still hers. Still there. She walked out of that castle on her own feet. She refused the litter they offered. She walked. Past the guards who had not looked at her. Through the gate that had been locked against the world. Into the pale grey light of a morning that felt almost like forgiveness. She did not look back. The other women, those who could walk, followed her. Those who could not were carried. All of them left that valley. History, being what it is, recorded very little of what happened next. The king was never formally charged. His name was never publicly attached to what occurred in that valley. There was a quiet negotiation. A diplomatic arrangement. A settling of accounts done entirely in whispers. As these things always are. As these things have always been. The women were dispersed. Some to convents. Some to distant family. Some simply vanished again into the silence of a world that had no language for what had been done to them. Isabella was sent to a manor in the north. small, modest, watched, still, by the king's men. But with windows. Windows that opened. She stood at those windows for a long time. Every morning. Just stood there. Breathing. Watching the light move across the hills. Remembering what it felt like to be a person. Not a problem. Not a secret. Not a thing to be managed. A person. With a name. With breath. With eyes that had seen things that the world pretended had never happened. You want to believe this was unusual. You want to believe this was a single dark chapter. An aberration. An exception. It was not. Across medieval Europe, across courts and kingdoms from England to Byzantium, from the Ottoman Empire to the Spanish Peninsula. Castles kept women. Women who knew things. Women who threatened things. Women who had simply outlived their usefulness to men who needed usefulness from everything and everyone around them. Most of their names are gone. Not because they were unimportant. Because the men who wrote history decided what was important. And what was important to those men was everything except this. The records that survived, they survived by accident. A monk who copied the wrong scroll. A letter misfiled in an archive. A trial transcript that someone forgot to burn. This is how we know. This is how we are able to sit here, centuries later, and say their names. Or at least try to say their names. Or at least acknowledge that there were names. That there were women. That there were walls. And that on the other side of those walls, things happened. Unthinkable things. That were thought. And planned. And executed. By men the history books called great. The castle still stands. Not that one specifically. But castles like it. You can visit them on holiday now. You can walk the corridors and look at the tapestries and hear about the kings. Their wars. Their victories. Their glorious, terrible legacy. And if you are quiet, if you stop in some lower corridor where the torch brackets are still rusted to the wall, if you place your hand against the stone, you might feel it. That particular cold. The kind that has nothing to do with temperature. The kind that is made of memory. Of breath held too long. Of voices that sang once, in the dark, because it was the only thing left. History did not remember them. But the stone did. The stone always does. And perhaps that is why we are still afraid of the dark. Not because of what might be in it, but because of what we put there. And left.